I am Marwan Cameron, and this is The Conduit. All right, y'all. It is Saturday, August 21, 2021. It's been a long day for my crew. Shout out to G2 down at the Seahawks game. It's preseason. Working concessions. Late game. Hopefully they've had a good event, as they usually do. I believe there is one more preseason game before the season starts. So if you want to join us, give us a call, 360-373-3000. We will pay for your food handler's permit, your alcohol permit. We'll take you down to the stadium. We'll have a lot of fun together, get you back home safe, and it's all for a good cause. You might even hear from them later on, but that is what they are doing on this fine Saturday. I don't even know what the score is. But I told you yesterday that I would be back and wanted to talk a little bit more about critical race theory. And while we're touching on this subject is the event that is happening tomorrow in Poulsbo. But, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, let's do some housekeeping, some maintenance there. If you're new to us, you can get to us at YouTube. Just go ahead and search my name, Marwan Cameron, MarWanCameron. It's so much easier to find The Conduit that way because there are so many things that use that name. If you want to reach out through Facebook, Gather Together, Grow Together is our Facebook page, or you can join my Facebook page, Marwan Cameron. You can follow us on Instagram at _conduit 2021 or Twitch at Mr. Cameron 124. If you want to donate, the Cash App is there for you. $ the conduit 2021. All right. So as I was saying before, tomorrow we have someone coming into a Poulsbo church to have a conversation about critical race theory and religion. Is it biblical? Now, this person has quite the reputation. You may have seen information on the Kitsap Sun. I believe there will be protest tomorrow at the event, and that will be at the Gateway Church, and that address is 18901 8th Ave, Northeast Poulsbo. It is open to the public, and so it'll be online at 9 and at 10:30, and then at 6 p.m. there will be a Q&A panel discussion. So I think it's important that, as I was saying yesterday, that we know what's going on in our community. You have to know what's going on in your community. And to that end, you've got to get involved. We cannot wait on other people to fix whatever the situation is. And I'm speaking very general right now. It could be CRT, it could be homelessness, it could be food insecurity, it could be housing, it could be job opportunities. Whatever it is that you're an advocate for, you've got to come off the bench. It's time to do more. It is good to get the information out on social media, either through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, whatever your forum is. But a lot of us don't even know that this is actually happening here in our small community. And so when these decisions are made, folks are really frustrated and angry, and they don't know where it came from or who made the decision, how it came to be. And although the tea leaves were obviously going that way in regards to smoking, I remember when It was first being proposed to end smoking indoors. And friends and acquaintances that smoked back then were so angry about how could they, you know, pass a law on us smoking inside. And I asked, well, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to vote? Are you going to get involved? Nah, I'm not going to do any of that. And of course, it happened. And again, that's something kind of momentous that the nation was working toward. Uh, so maybe they could have prolonged it. But if you don't even try, then you're going to get what you get. And I think a lot of us have been getting what we get. And it is tremendously difficult to do anything outside of how busy we are. Check to check. Don't have two nickels to rub together. Robbing Peter to pay Paul. All the sayings, right? Working 2 and 3 jobs. Coming home to take care of the kids. Trying to get them where they need to go. Trying to take care of all the different things. And then you say, hey, you also want me to be involved in a board meeting or a school board or a PTA or a commission. When do I have the time for that? And I know it's difficult. It's asking a lot. It's asking to put more on than you already have in some instances. But more than that, it's saying we've got to prioritize the things that are really going to impact us. We're working so hard, and it's like, hey, I need a break. I need some me time. I need some downtime. I need to recharge. I don't have anything left. And by the time we look up, which I think is kind of by design, the decisions have been made. And so if we want that to change, whatever that is, whatever gets your goat, you're going to have to become a part of it. I've been in a lot of spaces over the last few months with Zoom. And I've been surprised to see, one, mostly the same faces on 5 or more different committees or groups submitting their ideas. Same person. And while great in their own right, decent in their own right, they still are going to have a myopic viewpoint that is them. There's no way that they can advocate for the needs of all the people that they represent in the different spaces they find themselves in. And after all, they're one voice. So we have to be there. And I noticed too that oftentimes people will they'll be a part of something, and you only see a few folks in the room, and you're like, man, there's a lot more space here. If there were more people here, they probably would try it in our ways. Because that's the prevailing idea. That's the prevailing thought. But you got to be involved. You got to get involved. If you plan on living here, if you got kids growing up here, if you're going to retire here, whatever the case may be, you need to know what's happening. As I was saying last night, there's so many things that are happening in our community. So many tragic, unnecessary things. We're not large. We're a small community. A few 100,000, if I'm not mistaken. Might be wrong about that. But yes, tomorrow is critical race theory. I've been asked to cover this tomorrow, which is what prompted me to get in and do a little bit more research on what critical race theory was. I do not put myself forth as an expert. And as I was saying yesterday, it was very difficult for me to find information that really talked about what critical race theory is. And I saw a lot of folks that were against critical race theory. And I'm going to show you some of the information that I came across. I think that's important. And yesterday, what I came to was critical race theory was racism is normal and not apparent in society. That stories or counter narratives are useful in explaining how racism operates, and it also employs critical social science. And I went over those three things yesterday. And I talked about how I would agree with that assessment. And I showed a few examples like policing and sentencing and jury selection and jury of our peers, and gave examples of crack versus the opiate and the meth epidemic, housing, employment, reparations, education, voting, healthcare, military business opportunities, immigration, etc. Even with immigration, if you think about what's happening right now, I'm thinking about my Haitian brothers and sisters. And assassination, there's civil unrest, there's natural disasters, people are trying to flee, the United States is sending them back. We pull out of Afghanistan, and the first busloads of people are arriving in different cities across this nation. I don't know. I'll let you sit with that. Let you sit with that. But as I said, came across some information. I'm continuing to do some research and want to share information that I've seen and come across. Also want to kind of show both sides of the conversation. Obviously, there's going to be one side tomorrow, which is why I think it's important to share another side. Because if you're truly going to have a conversation or do a deep dive, critically think, analysis, then it will require you to actually look at both sides, to have the ability to ascertain what's hyperbole, what's dishonest, what's straight out lie, what's opinion, what's fact. How do you discern between those? And, there's a lot of smart people. And even with that, all the smart folks that exist, it's interesting that when it comes time to critically think and have a conversation about for or against and look at the facts on both sides, the pros and cons, all of a sudden we can't see anything but our viewpoint. The thing that supports our position is all that we can see. And we share the most incredible, crazy arguments that make no sense at all. And if we're not doing any of the research on our own, we begin to parrot information that we don't know where it came from. We heard it from MSNBC. We heard it from a friend who got it from their parent, who got that from Fox News. So we have no idea. It sounds good and we kind of trust this person. So, all right. There was uh, a chat yesterday in yesterday's podcast. I'll try to pull that up later. And it was after the podcast was over. It actually came in today. And the gentleman was saying, well, critical race theory is supporting a race war and some other things. And, if that is what critical race theory is saying, I would like to see the evidence in that. Because if you can show the evidence in that, if you can show that in their doctrine, in the paperwork, that that's what that is saying, well, hard to refute facts. But I feel 100% sure that that is not a fact. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our first video here. Copyright disclaimer: under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowances are made for fair use for purposes such as education, training, nonprofit, yada, yada, yada. Like I said, I've got a number of videos here. As I was also sharing yesterday, it was difficult to find information that really talked about what CRT was. And so what I found, I think, has been a lot closer to the mark today. But as I said, I had to dig for this. This wasn't something that you can kind of come up with quickly. Aside from reading periodicals and going to scholarly sites and really digging in and reading, and then it's not really a summary, which means you've got to do a lot of digesting to really see what it is. But I think this is helpful here. So let's go ahead and take a look.
A basic definitional question. When you hear critical race theory over and over again, what should people understand? How do you define CRT?
So I first want to just make a distinction between CRT, which is a theoretical framework that I learned in graduate school and read about in graduate school, versus teaching about race and racism in American history critically. So critical race theory is a framework. It's a theoretical framework that was developed in the 1980s by legal scholars to help us understand.
So I'm going to go ahead and pause this from time to time. And just kind of add some commentary. I think it's important to note that critical race theory isn't new. It is theoretical, right? It's a framework. What it is a lens in which to look at racism as an institution through the different things like education or criminality, housing, things like that, right? So this isn't new. This has been around for a very long time.
Understand how it is that structural and racial disparities endure in our society, and how that is actually engendered in some of our laws and policies. And so the idea was to get us to think systemically, as opposed to just thinking that racism manifests by individuals just mistreating each other.
So talking about being built into policies. So we know from the Constitution, right? That's technically a policy. That racism was built on that. If you watch the 13th Amendment on Netflix, then you know that in that amendment, you can still be considered a slave, and that has not been amended. And we know that there have been laws that have been passed from slavery, from the inception of the Constitution till today. And so that part A, or part one of, is it normal? Is racism normal? Or is it just a few bad apples? Oh, it kind of happens here and there, but it's not pervasive. As I said yesterday, I do believe that checks the box. Let's continue.
that there are actual structures in our society that create these different kinds of racial gaps and racial disparities economically, in terms of housing, in terms of education. And so that's what they do, is that they actually show us how the law, how laws that are supposed to be neutral actually can promulgate or support racial disparities.
For those of us that have, just want to make sure that's on. For those of us that have experienced family members or friends, have watched newscasts of how Black people end up being sentenced with longer sentences for the same or similar crimes, how they're overcharged, how they're policed, how jury selection is manipulated, how they don't experience a jury of their peers, how they typically don't have the resources to mount a defense. All right, let's keep going.
That's a theoretical framework. I think what we're talking about today, though, is some contestation and conflict over how you teach about race, racial hierarchies, critically, racism in schools and society. And so the two are being conflated.
And so when you hear people talking repeatedly about critical race theory, what is your thought?
Well, I hear people talking about critical race theory. I see that as a straw man for many communities, politicians particularly, trying to shape the knowledge base and what we teach students. I think that there is some fear about raising consciousness about structural inequality, about structural racism, because it does implicate many of our practices in our society.
And so we're seeing that in Texas, Florida. There are many states that are passing laws where you won't talk about, true American history. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. It's our history. Why would we hide? Why would we not talk about it? It happened.
It indicates what we would have to do differently in government. And some of that is ideological in terms of there's a lot of resistance to how we do things to be fairer and more just in our society. So, there are a number of, I read a really good article just yesterday in the New Yorker about the origins of this conflict and who's behind it. And it's a concerted effort by many on the right to mitigate the extent to which we really augment and increase the understanding of racism in our society.
All right. So that was from the PBS NewsHour. I think that is that can be helpful to take a look at. I thought that was a little clearer in regards to what critical race theory is and what it is not. I think that's important. So what are your thoughts on that? My argument would be that,
let's just start
sorry about that. If you're trying to teach history, which is what needs to be taught, then you teach history as it happened, not a revisionist history. And you teach the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then you accept what it is, right? And so we've watched how statues are coming down, how people are against Columbus Day and who he was and how he behaved and the things that he did, he and his crew. And so generations of children have grown up celebrating Columbus. And Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Is that right? I think you learned that in elementary, right? It's so ingrained. You talk about indoctrinated, which is what I hear opponents of critical race theory espouse, right? Indoctrinated. Here I am close to 50, and I could still tell you the 3 ships of Columbus because it was taught year after year after year after year. But it was never taught what he did to indigenous people, what he did to other people. Let's go with another video here. This one is President Obama, or ex-President Obama, former President Obama, however you say that.
So what did you make of that comment that he had?
You know,
That's Geraldo there. Go ahead and start that from the beginning.
Mocking Republicans over their concerns about teaching
Fair
critical race
use.
theory in schools. Take a look.
There are certain right-wing media venues, for example, that monetize and capitalize on stoking the fear and resentment of a white population that is witnessing a changing America. You would think, with all the public policy debates that are taking place right now, that the Republican Party would be engaged in a significant debate. Lo and behold, the single most important issue to them apparently right now is critical race theory. Who knew that was the threat to our republic?
And Fox News contributor Leo Terrell calling out the former president for his rhetoric.
he's the last person on earth that should be promoting the critical race theory. Here's a man, if he's oppressed, he became president of the United States. When you promote a theory of hate that specifically targets a particular group of people, i.e. being white, that is a discussion and affects every American in this country. Who in this world oppressed President Obama? He became president.
Greg, give us your take.
All right. So what's important here, one of the reasons why I wanted to show this video was that this isn't just a black and white issue, right? This isn't black people are for critical race theory, white people are against critical race theory. You have black people that are for critical race theory and black people that are against it. And there's the same vein. You have white people that are for it. You have white people that are against it, as well as everybody else. And so it's important to note. And some make the same arguments, some make different arguments. All right, let's continue.
Take on the Obama interview.
That was a really stupid comment by former President Obama. He's basically insulting people for actually understanding a critical curriculum. He would prefer you to be ignorant of it, to be a low information.
And critical race theory is not curriculum. So that's important to note. There isn't some standardized curriculum of critical race theory history that would be doled out across the states to be taught at different levels, right? What it's saying is teach history as it happened, the good, the bad, and ugly. Don't whitewash it.
In person, but all of what he should be saying, wow, I'm pretty impressed that these people know this stuff. It's and also he makes this mistake where he says, in the part of the interview, he talks about how his daughters are saying cancel culture is out of control or it's not good. And then he says CRT is harmless. He doesn't see the connection between the two. That critical race theory helps create the cancel culture by saying that everybody who isn't non-white is an oppressor.
As a side note, in regards to cancel culture, do I think people should be canceled? I'm torn on that. But I'm leaning more toward no. And the reason why I'm more toward no, Don't cancel anyone. Allow them their space to say what they believe. As I said yesterday, I'd rather know where you stand. I want to know what your opinion is. And if I don't agree with that opinion, depending on how much I disagree with it, if I think that it's unethical, if I think it's evil, then I don't deal with you, or I know how to deal with you. But to shut people down, all that does is just build resentment, right? Where they do things in back rooms. Conversations are had and you're not at the table. And you can say, well, those things are going to happen anyway. But as I said, I like my stuff right in front. Just give it to me raw. I can take it. Let people be who they're going to be. If you have certain beliefs, then I'm probably not going to patronize your business. It's that simple. Don't go. Don't go to their space. Don't go to their club. Don't try to get a membership at their organization. Do you. Start your own. Shop somewhere else. Support something else. Work somewhere else. Why would you want to work at a place that has whatever the belief is that you would be so against? And how would that feel to be in a space where you're working and the majority of the people that are around you feel some kind of negative, bad way about you, and you don't even know it? See, I'd rather know, because I want to go and work somewhere else, right? I don't want people smiling in my face, making me think that I belong and they want me there. Yeah, let people be who they are.
And therefore must be canceled. And finally, how does he not get that education is actually way more important than anything he just talked about, whether it was climate change or anything? His priorities are all contingent on solving education, which is basically the pyramid base for everything else. I mean, if you look, we talked about crime in the A block. If you look at people that are killed by police, you can trace it almost all the way back to their education. How was their education?
It would be the root cause.
It would be the root. Thank you, Dana. The root.
So here he is. He's saying that the most important thing is education. And she says it's the root cause. So if you're going to make the argument that criminality is directly a result of education, then that's actually them saying that critical race theory does belong. Because when Black people, when Africans were brought here on the slave ships, we were separated. We were told that we couldn't read. We were whipped for it, worse. So you couldn't learn. Even today, we have schools. There are no computers. The textbooks are decades outdated. There aren't enough books for the students. We know what the reading level is for our Black boys. You can check out a previous podcast that I did a few months back on how a single mother found out after 4 years thinking her son's going to graduate, and he's got I think it was like a 0.03 grade point average. Hadn't been going to school, hadn't been doing any work, but somehow didn't know in 4 years. And the school district, the school didn't do anything, the parent didn't do anything, and the child is the one that's harmed from it. Normalization, right? Racism is normal. So in this example here, if what he's saying is, hey, there's a direct line, there's a direct connection or correlation between education and criminality. And because black people don't have education, they're going to commit more crimes. Then you have to look at the root, as the female reporter said. Why are they not educated? Remember segregation? Separate but equal. It wasn't equal. Being able to go to better private schools, better public schools, better charter schools. Now, I'm just building on that statement, that argument there. So then what they were saying is they actually would be supporters of critical race theory, which again, that critical race theory is what college scholars learn about. The true argument is really about, is true American history going to be taught and not what has been taught? And we'll get into that for sure. Let's get into another video here. And this is going to be from Essie Cupp. Now, Essie Cupp, for those that may know who she is a, what do they call it, a news pundit who has been on, I think, like The Hill, CNN. I think she's been on Fox News. She's been on MSNBC. I mean, she's definitely made the rounds. A lot of places, right? And I'm not even sure which way she leans politically. But I think it's good to show the balance, right? I showed you an African-American male who was against CRT. And let's see what she has to say here.
Theism all over again. I'm Essie Cupp. Welcome to Unfiltered. If it feels like the 1950s, that's because some prominent Republican outrage peddlers are trying to red scare you about subversive Marxist ideas and stuff. That's right, despite a global pandemic that we're still trying to get under control, a rise in violent crime and mass shootings, a looming debt limit deadline that could lead to a, quote, absolutely catastrophic hit to our economy, according to the Treasury Secretary, crumbling infrastructure all over the country, and continued attacks on our elections from inside and outside the U.S., Fox News' Laura Ingraham would like to speak to the manager about critical race theory. Right-wing pundits and lawmakers are just beside themselves over the news that there is one elective class at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point that explores the idea that racism exists in America at an institutional level. How dare it? After foaming at the mouths over this atrocity, they pointed their pitchforks at General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a man who served at multiple command and staff positions in 8 divisions and special forces over nearly 40 years in the military, because that's the guy you want to tell how to do his job. But that's just what Laura Ingraham did on Fox News this week, as Milley testified before the House Armed Services Committee. Amidst an alarming rise in extremism inside the armed forces, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is conducting stand-downs or conversations with service members about racism and extremist groups. It's a reaction in part to the January 6th storming of the Capitol. Around 15% of those arrested for their roles in the insurrection have former military ties.
Okay. 15% of the January 6th insurrection had military ties. It's pretty large, right? And she didn't talk about the police who also were in attendance on that day. So, again, is racism normal? Or is it apparent in society? The argument is that it is normal. And critical race theory is looking at different institutions, the military, housing, employment, through the lens of racism to see, is that the reason why it still persists? That's how I'm unpacking the understanding. And so if someone wants to correct me on that, please do. But if people are angry that there's one class in the military that is looking at it, right? We know that we have domestic terrorism. We know we have the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys and the Ku Klux Klan and so many other right-wing, radical, violent militias. Why would the military not look at these things? They have it in their own ranks. And I don't know if that seems so hard to believe or not. And I don't know how it is currently, but I know my friends from the 90s would tell me about the Bloods and the Crips that used to be on the carriers. Because there was a time when you got an offer, right? You either go to the military or you go to jail. And a lot of folks chose the military. And it's like, there's gangs on aircraft carriers? Like, what? That seemed unbelievable. Couldn't believe that. It's like, no, for real. Just teach the history. Just teach actual history. What happened? I think the denial of our history actually makes things worse. You know, opponents say that it hurts their children, both black and white.
Why aren't you the landlord?
Right? It hurts their children, both black and white, right? That it separates kids by race, it demonizes white children, and it says to black children that they're oppressed and there's nothing that they can do about it. And so that's, for those that are on that side, that's how they feel. But I would ask, when we are raising our children and our children do something wrong, we tell our children to own up to it, and we tell them to apologize, right? And if it's within their power, to make it right. So if I pushed you down, or if you tripped and you fell and you spilled your lunch, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean that. Or at the time I did mean it, but I'm sorry that I did that to you. Let me help you clean your lunch up. Is that not what we teach our children? So I think if that is the case, to me, I'm not seeing how that would be harmful to the children. And our children are quite resilient. But having them growing up, Nina, Pinta, Santa Maria, learning falsehoods and lies that the Indians and Columbus had Thanksgiving together and everything was all nice and grand and just awesome. That George Washington could not tell a lie. He chopped down the cherry tree. But they didn't talk about the slaves that he had. And that although he wrote a letter saying that he wanted to free his slaves, but that was after his wife, Martha, she died because she still needed the slaves, right? See, that's the actual history. We tell our kids to apologize and to make it right if they can. And from there, we forgive, we don't forget, and we move on. But we have never gotten to that point in this country. We're just at, get over it. That was a long time ago. I didn't have any slaves. Or I did just fine. I'm black. If you work hard enough, you can have whatever you want. You can even be president of the United States. Not likely, but okay. But that's what we tell our kids. I think it's so simple when we think about that. I think we, especially scholars, can make things so so ridiculously over intellectual that it's stupid. Our country did wrong. It needs to atone. It needs to address it. It should not hide from it. That is our history. What is the saying? If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. So apologize. Do the best you can to make it right. And though you don't forget, we forgive and we move on. To me, that seems really simple. And it's unfortunate that there's so much resistance to it. And the thought that anything else would be harmful to the children. And arguments like, well, you're not going to learn English or math or STEM. I've seen signs, STEM, not CRT. There's no proposal to say, hey, you know what? You're not going to get science, technology, and math. You're going to get critical race theory. You're going to get how you were so bad throughout history. That's not what that's saying. See, it's so disingenuous and people get caught up in the fervor of it all. And they're so afraid to have a true and honest conversation because it just seems like it's giving ground. And so when we act like the politicians that are in office and become so entrenched, then nothing gets done, right? It's all about positions and posturing. You see the conversations. For once, it'd be nice just to, have a politician say, you know what? This is what I think. I was wrong. I'm going to answer your question directly. I'm not going to double talk. I'm not going to circle around it. I'm not going to tell you it's none of your business. I'm not going to give you some legalese or some lawyerly answer. I'm just going to answer the question that you asked. And if you're trying to catch me up in a gotcha, then the people that support me understand what you're doing, that you're being intellectually dishonest, that you're trying to catch me in a gotcha moment, and that you are the bad actor, not me. I wish our politicians would do that, because our leaders have to lead. They have to lead by example, right? It would be such a fundamental shift if our leadership did that. This is who I am. I'm running on these items here. And I'm not going to give you political spin. I'm not going to give you talking points from powerful entities on the left or the right. I'm just going to appeal to how I feel and hope that you listening to me, I've said enough and I've been honest and straightforward that I will have earned your vote. And if either side asks me a question, I'm going to answer the question that was given. And I think even the media at some point in time would start to back down, because they would look like the jackasses that they often are for trying to ask gotcha questions. For asking things that aren't relevant. It would take time. Maybe I'm being a little too optimistic, but I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think what I said before is true, and what the other By and For leaders were saying a few weeks ago was also true, is that we have to participate in the spaces that we haven't participated in before in the past, that we belong in those spaces, that your voice needs to be heard. And as we start to embrace being in these spaces, learning how these things come to be and come to pass, you ever wonder, and again, both sides, I don't identify as a Democrat or Republican. Let me just be clear about that. There's some dumbasses on both sides, some dangerous and I think downright evil people on both sides. But you ever wonder, how the hell did this person get elected? They seem dumb as a box of rocks. How are they in this position right now? How have they been in this position for 20 years? Biden, Pelosi. How? How are they still there? If your state is an S show and it's been like that for I don't know how long, why do your constituents continue to vote you in? Both sides. You ever wonder that? And I know there's the dark money and everything else that comes in there. But I really feel like, to me, that's the reason why President Trump won. Is he presented in a way that the people that voted for him thought was refreshing. I am who I am. This is you get what you get. And the people were like, yeah, you know what? I'm tired of what we usually been getting. Let's go. And he almost won again. There's a lot of experts that say if COVID didn't hit, he would have won again. even with all the admitted mistakes that were made. He didn't get beat in a landslide. And I'm not saying that, he wasn't honest all the way through and he was some kind of paragon of righteousness. But for what he was, that's what he presented. And the people that voted for him, they appreciated that over the alternative. So I do believe that if we start to occupy these spaces and learn and participate, and not just one, many of us, then those that are earnest in what they believe and say what they think and don't double talk will end up rising to the top. That I believe. So it's very likely someone who's listening to me or people like me on a local level, for sure. Get involved. Your voice matters. All right, let's play this next video here.
To the State Board of Education meeting today to make their voices heard. The major focus, what kids should and should not learn in history class. Things getting so heated at one point, officials had to take a break.
Fair use.
They don't stop
So you could hear the crowd chanting, allow teachers to teach the truth. Several people in that room speaking up for and against teachers discussing race and its influence on society in the classroom.
The teacher's responsibility is only to teach them what's supposed to be taught in school, not their opinion.
How can educators expect to teach history accurately without talking about...
Let me stop that right there. So they're supposed to teach what they're supposed to be teaching in school, not opinion. History, not opinion. George Washington had slaves. I think pretty much most of our founding fathers had slaves. Slavery happened. The Civil Rights era happened. The Jim Crow era happened. Not opinion, fact, history. These folks are so whipped up into their own frenzy, they don't even hear themselves not even making any sense. Let's continue.
Race and racism. How can you discuss the civil rights movement without discussing race and racism?
It is what it is. It's our history. It's not Black history. It's not white history. It's American history. We're Americans. It happened. Denying it keeps us where we're at.
Ultimately, though, the board decided to ban critical race theory from being taught in Florida schools. News 6's Amanda Castro is live in the newsroom with more.
Now, the thing is again, as I said at the top of this podcast, critical race theory is something that college scholars look at. has been around since the 80s. There is no curriculum that is rolled out to fourth graders or high schoolers. See, the media is so dangerous because they know that that's not what is being supported here. But instead of cleaning it up, it gets ratings. Ratings make money. So we'll go ahead with continuing to confuse the American people.
On the contentious meeting and how leaders ultimately made their decision. Amanda.
Well, Ginger, supporters like Governor Ron DeSantis say this new rule is all about teaching the facts of our history, while opponents say it's politicizing classroom instruction.
All in favor, say aye.
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 The State Board of Education unanimously passing a new rule, changing how history is taught in public schools. It bans critical race theory, which a UCF professor defines as a, quote, theoretical perspective and practice for examining the role of race and racism in society. Governor Ron DeSantis speaking in favor of the new rule, saying education needs to be grounded in facts.
I agree with that. Education does need to be grounded in facts. The Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. Christopher Columbus was awesome. He discovered America. He had Thanksgiving with the Indians. That's what I remember learning about Columbus. Not all the horrible things that he and his crew did. So DeSantis is absolutely correct. Teach the facts of history. That's it. Not hard. Not hard to do. I do believe that is the way through. It really is. If we can just get to the other side. Will we get there? Man, I don't know. It's not looking good right now. I will readily admit that. But again, as I was saying yesterday, critical race theory, racism is normal, not aberrant in society. And it is normal. There are institutions that have been held up. Let's take a look at this report. This is from the sentencingproject.org. The report to the United Nations on racial disparities in the U.S. criminal justice system. This was written back in April 19th of 2018. The Sentencing Project submitted a report to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. So if you want to get this, you can. The United States criminal justice system is the largest in the world. At year-end 2015, over 6.7 million individuals were under some form of correctional control in the United States, including 2.2 million incarcerated in federal, state, or local prisons and jails. The U.S. is a world leader in its rate of incarceration, dwarfing the rate of nearly every other nation. Such broad statistics mask the racial disparity that pervades the U.S. criminal justice system. And for African Americans in particular, African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be arrested. Once arrested, they are more likely to be convicted. And once convicted, they are more likely to experience lengthy prison sentences. African American adults are 5.9 times as likely to be incarcerated than whites, and Hispanics are 3.1 times as likely. As of 2001, 1 of every 3 Black boys born in that year could expect to go to prison in his lifetime. as could 1 in every 6 Latinos, compared to 1 of every 17 white boys. Racial and ethnic disparities among women are less substantial than among men, but remain prevalent. So how is this? So when we're arrested for drug charges, and we're pulled over and given a warning, many of my white friends talk about those experiences. Oh yeah, they just give me a warning. We've seen countless videos where white people are yelling at the police and they won't even write them a ticket. So when a kid with marijuana or some other drug is arrested and charged by the police, or a young adult, the police are in the high crime rates, right? High crime areas. But every college and university is a high crime area. Every frat and sorority house is full of drugs, alcohol, and underage drug and alcohol use. But they don't have their lives ruined, right? They have their whole life ahead of them. Their life is so bright. So if the cops wanted to, the numbers could quickly actually hit the rates based on the actual population. But see, that doesn't happen. We don't get the warnings. We don't get the, she's too pretty to go to prison. Or he did it because of affluenza. I don't know if you remember that. They didn't want to send him to prison because he was too rich. Policing. Racial disparity in the United States criminal justice system. In 2016, Black Americans comprised of 27% of all individuals arrested in the United States, double their share of the total population. Black youth accounted for 15% of all U.S. children, yet made up 35% of the juvenile arrests that year. What might appear at first to be a linkage between race and crime is in large part a function of concentrated urban poverty, which is far more common for African Americans than other racial groups. This accounts for more of a substantial portion of African Americans' increasing likelihood of committing certain violent and property crimes. But while there is still a higher Black rate of involvement in certain crimes, white Americans overestimate the proportion of crime committed by Blacks and Latinos, overlook the fact that communities of color are disproportionately victims of crime, and discount the prevalence of bias in the criminal justice system. And as I said, I submit that example to you because if the police went through the colleges and universities and didn't say, hey, you know what, we're not going to ruin this kid's life, we're going to go ahead and charge them. We're not going to charge the adults. You get drug court, housing first. During the crack epidemic, you got mandatory minimums. You got Biden's law. Racism is normal, not apparent in society. In addition to pursuing policies that bring little gain in crime reduction and impose great cost on people of color, policymakers and criminal justice leaders have been late to address discriminatory policies for which they provide no justification, such as biased use of officer discretion and revenue-driven policing. Thus, in recent years, black drivers have been somewhat more likely to be stopped than whites, but have been far more likely to be searched and arrested. The causes and outcomes of these stops differ by race, and staggering racial disparities in rates of police stops persistent in certain jurisdictions, pointing to unchecked racial bias, whether intentional or not, in officer discretion. A closer look at the causes of traffic stop reveal that police are more likely to stop Black and Hispanic drivers for discretionary reasons, for investigatory stops, proactive stops used to investigate drivers deemed suspicious, rather than traffic safety stops. Reactive stops used to enforce traffic laws or vehicle codes. Nationwide survey also reveal disparities in the outcomes of police stops. Once pulled over, Black and Hispanic drivers were 3 times as likely as whites to be searched, 6% and 7% versus 2%, and Blacks were twice as likely as whites to be arrested. These patterns hold even though police officers generally have a lower contraband hit rate when they search Black versus white drivers. Let me read that again because no one ever shares that stat. These patterns hold even though police officers generally have a lower contraband hit rate when they search Black versus white drivers. Pre-trial. African Americans were incarcerated in local jails at the rate of 3.5 times that of non-Hispanic whites in 2016. These disparities stem in part from the policies and practices of policing described earlier, but are compounded by those introduced at this stage of processing. Given that nearly 2/3, 65% of people in jail in 2016 were being detained prior to trial, policies and decisions influencing pretrial detention play a key role in driving the disparity in the jail population and beyond. Pretrial detention has been shown to increase the odds of conviction, and people who are detained awaiting trial are also more likely to accept less favorable plea deals, to be sentenced to prison, and to receive longer sentences. 70% of pretrial releases require money, bond, and especially high hurdle for low-income defendants who are disproportionately people of color. Blacks and Latinos are more likely than whites to be denied bail, to have a higher money bond set, and to be detained because they cannot pay their bond. They are often assessed to be higher safety and flight risk because they are more likely to experience socioeconomic disadvantage and to have criminal records. Implicit bias also contributes to people of color faring worse than comparable whites in bail determinations. Sentencing. Although African Americans and Latinos comprise 29% of the U.S. population, they make up 57% of the U.S. prison population, almost 60%. This results in imprisonment rates for African American and Hispanic adults that are 5.9 and 3.1 times the rate for white adults, respectively, and at far higher levels in some states. Notably, these disparities exist for both the least and most serious offenses. Of the 277,000 people in prison nationwide for a drug offense, over half, 56%, were African American or Latino. Nearly half, 48%, of the 206,000 people serving life and virtual life prison sentences are African American, and another 15% are Latino. Among young African Americans, are 4.1 times as likely to be committed to secure placements as white Americans. American Indians are 3.1 times as likely, and Hispanics are 1.5 times as likely. Although levels of youth confinement have significantly declined in recent years, the racial gap between Black and American Indian versus white youth has increased. The racial disparities in the adult and juvenile justice system stem in part from the policing and pretrial factors described earlier, and are compounded by discretionary decisions and sentencing policies that disadvantage people of color because of their race and higher rates of socioeconomic disadvantage. These include biased use of discretion, policies that disadvantage people of color, policies that disadvantage poor people. I'm not going to go into parole or post-prison collateral consequences, right? Into the rate of recidivism. But here, the Welfare Reform Act of 1996 imposed a lifetime denial of cash assistance and food stamps to people convicted in state or federal courts of felony drug offenses, unless states opt out of the ban. Given the dynamics of social class and the accompanying disparate racial effects of the criminal justice system, women and children of color are disproportionately impacted by the exclusionary law. By 2018, 24 states had fully opted out of the food stamp ban. 21 others had only done so in part, and 5 states continued to fully enforce the ban. And even larger numbers of states continued to impose a partial or full ban on cash assistance for people with felony drug convictions. You know, one of the things that is truly offensive, and I'm not a marijuana user, so many of our black kids, our black men and our black women, still in jail for marijuana charges. And now that the United States has found a way to monetize it and tax it, they've legalized it. Not federally, but, certain states. And John Boehner and many other politicians have created these mega corporations and are making millions of dollars off of the marijuana industry. And when you go and you check out many of the marijuana stores that exist, I'm here in the state of Washington, so of course there's a ton of them. You can go down and on one street, it's like Starbucks. There's one on the corner. There's one next door to 7-Eleven. And there's another one down the street within a block. And I'm like, where are the black owners of weed shops? Do I see any of those? They're in jail still. They were arrested and sentenced more than any other race, but the stats show that whites and blacks use marijuana at about the same rate. So would go to say that shouldn't there be more black owners of marijuana stores? Should they at least be let out of prison because it's legal in their state? Racism is normal. These are some of the things, recommendations to the UN from the special rapporteur in the war on drugs: eliminate mandatory minimum sentences. President Biden, then Senator Biden. Reduce the use of cash bail, fully fund indigent defense agencies. I believe the rate of people who are indigent or cannot pay for a legal defense, if you cannot afford a defense, an attorney will be appointed to you. I believe it's in the 90s that they take the plea deal because they cannot afford counsel. I was dating a woman who had some children and was dealing with the juvenile system. It was her turn to go up. Waited 3 weeks. Didn't even know the child's name. Didn't even know who she was. Literally was being read in while the judge is talking to her. And the mother, the daughter, is just sitting there like people are just talking back and forth and making decisions on their life, and they don't even know what's happening. Prosecuting attorney, public defender, wants to become a prosecuting attorney. So takes the crap job so they can move up. They trade cases. I'll give you this one, but I'm going to need this one on that. Adopt a policy requiring the use of racial impact statements, develop and implement training to reduce racial bias, address collateral consequences. And one that's not in here is, okay, so the cop arrested you. Let's take out police brutality, because it doesn't happen in every arrest, right? Police arrest suspect. And we see oftentimes how they're overcharged, right? You were resisting arrest. You did all these things. You did one thing, but they found a way to charge you with 5 things, right? So now you got these 5 charges, and you're sitting there and the prosecutor has your file. It's like, all right, we're going to offer them a plea. We're going to throw away the resisting arrest if they plead to assault 3 or assault 4. Gotcha. And we'll give you this. But if you don't, you're looking at 364 days. You can't afford an attorney, you said? Yeah, we'll go ahead and suspend 362 days because you spent 2 days in jail, so you'll get time served. Don't get into any trouble for 2 years, or it's going to nullify the deal. And oh yeah, we're looking for you because you commit crimes, right? I know that you've got a cavity or a cracked tooth, and law-abiding citizens medicate with wine in the evening or marijuana. Hell, they may even be using illegal drugs, but they're professionals, right? So that's okay. You're low income, you're poor. You can't get into the public health care dentist for 3 months. Your mouth is killing you. They tell you to chew some aspirin. You know that doesn't do anything for you. It's continuing to rot. Everything else you got going on, yeah, you got some anxiety. Hey, man, even the doctor maybe has suggested marijuana might be good for your anxiety or this particular pain or whatever the case may be. So you don't have the health care to get it taken care of. So you're living in tremendous amounts of pain. You need to self-medicate. Wrong place, wrong time. And you're done. Oh, and as innocent as that story sounds, you need to go ahead and do an assessment. Now they're going to go back and you're going to have a conversation. They're going to interview you. And through the interview, they have determined that you've had challenges with alcohol and drugs since your teens. When a high percentage of kids experimented with drugs and alcohol back when they were kids, you're reflecting on something that you did 20 years ago, and now you need a drug treatment plan. Why? Because money. I better take that plea. I sure can't do a year. I already missed work, so I probably lost a job. I'm going to be late on my rent. COVID aside, maybe I'm going to get evicted. It's going to take me a while to find another job. I mean, after all, I've got to find one, apply, wait for them to interview me, wait for them to onboard me, wait the extra week because I don't get paid on the regular pay scale. I got to skip the week to wait for payroll to kick it in. Well, now I'm a month and a half behind on my rent. All because I had this cracked tooth and no health care, or health care that wouldn't let me in for 3 months. So I'm self-medicating. But the soccer mom, she's good. We're not going to the frat house, as I said before, the sorority house. We're not going to those parties. We know that it's there. We watch the movies, Animal House, and on and on and on it goes. But we're not going to destroy their lives. So racism is normal. This is an interesting read. I encourage you to read it. As I said, I wanted to bring you some actual stats because that was part 3 of that particular assertion on critical race theory and why it was important to look at, right? So it's not just the stories, which there are a bunch of them, but critical race theory, what people are fighting against is they don't want to face the bad behavior. And I'm using bad in very light terms. Slavery doesn't even have the meaning of what that word really means. It has no teeth. In a previous podcast, we talked about that. We talked about Black Wall Street and how there were many other cities that were destroyed where the government helped and covered it up. Where men, women, and children were raped by men and women. Were raped in public so other slaves could watch buck breaking. I wonder, Has the LGBTQ community had any conversations about that? I think that would be something that would need to be addressed. Mount Vernon. This is from mountvernon.org. Mount Vernon was the home of George Washington. It was also the home of hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children who lived here under Washington's control. When I was in school, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped it down the cherry tree. George Washington wore a wig. The first president. He had false teeth made out of wood. He depended on their labor to build and maintain his household and plantation. They, in turn, found ways to survive in a world that denied their freedom. As a young man, Washington accepted slavery, but after the Revolutionary War, he began to question it. Washington avoided the issue publicly. How courageous. Believing that bitter debates over slavery could tear apart the fragile nation. He made his most public anti-slavery statement after his death. You see that a lot, right? The woman that Emmett Till got murdered. A lot of people making deathbed confessions. He made his most public anti-slavery statement after his death. In his will, Washington ordered that his enslaved workers be freed at his wife's death. Because, my wife needs her slaves. I think slavery should end. I've got a conscience now. I'm dying. I'm getting ready to face an answer to God. So I should free these slaves. But Martha needs those slaves. I can't leave Martha without no slaves. What's she gonna do? He made his most public anti-slavery statement after his death. In his will, Washington ordered that his enslaved workers be freed at his wife's death. Unfortunately, this applied to fewer than half of the people in bondage at Mount Vernon. Those owned by the Custis estate were inherited by Martha Washington's grandchildren after her death. Damn, not her children, her grandchildren. Generational. Racism is normal. They were inherited by Martha Washington's grandchildren after her death. Many Washington and Curtis enslaved people had married and formed families together. For them, separation from loved ones tainted celebrations of newfound freedom. So Washington's slaves were freed at some point in time, but the Curtis estate or Custis estate, which was inherited by Martha Washington's grandchildren. You've got folks that are still enslaved and some that are freed, but they have started families. So what the hell do they do? At the time of George Washington's death, the Mount Vernon estate's enslaved population consisted of 317 people. These silhouettes are meant to represent people in bondage at George Washington's Mount Vernon. The designs were based on physical descriptions, age, gender, clothing, and work assignment. The standard slave quarter on Mount Vernon's 5 farms was a rough one-room log structure with a wooden chimney. On Mansion House Farm, many enslaved house servants had craftsmen lived in larger barrack-style quarters. At Mount Vernon's, many families were separated across different farms due to work assignments. So when people ask, why is it so hard for Black people to get along? the Latino community and the Asian community, they've got their culture and, they're together. Slavery was a unique experience. The treatment of Black Americans continued on. As resilient as we were, creating families through slavery, separated. House slave, field slave, taught to distrust. The snitching slave that would tell about the revolt to get the meritorious manumissions. Watch my previous podcasts. Shout out to Mr. Roosevelt Smith. If you looked at the podcast, if you haven't been to the African American Museum, you need to check it out. The harness and the bit that slaves who tried to run had to wear, the bell, so they could be heard. The chopping of the limbs so they couldn't escape. The whipping, the raping, the mutilation. It was bad. You don't get to cover that up. We don't get to cover that up. The treatment after slavery ended. The United Nations that I just read, and that was just on the criminal justice system. Currently, contemporary. We're not talking about 400 years ago or 50 years ago. Hell, George Floyd was last year. And I could show you 40 videos of current police brutality for no reason. And not just on Black and brown people. There's one where a white guy's in playing video games. I should show that one. Good God. He's playing video games with his girlfriend or his wife. Kid had just graduated high school or something like that. They're playing like Call of Duty. Police get called out because they hear, the video game. So the police come out. Well, he's had issues with people knocking on the door and doing all kinds of stuff. So he answers the door with his firearm. Legal. There's one cop on each door. So he opens up the door and walks out of the house to address the cops. His back is to one cop. Gun, shoots him dead immediately. That was a white man. Lost his life. Just like that. Labor in the Mansion. In 1799, a team of at least 10 enslaved butlers, housemaids, waiters, and cooks ensured the Washingtons and their guests' needs were always met. This seems kind. Restraint and punishment, or resistance and punishment. Mount Vernon's enslaved community found many ways to resist bondage and challenge George Washington's authority. Resistance ranged from subtle behavior to visible actions. Learn more. So even this is quite kind. The only unavoidable subject of regret. Historian Mary Thomas's new book, The Only Unavoidable Subject of Regret, George Washington, Slavery and the Enslaved Community in Mount Vernon, explores the lives of the enslaved community at Mount Vernon. After his death, Mount Vernon's enslaved community was divided several times over. Martha Washington is a slave owner. Few of Martha Washington's letters survive, so her feelings often remain elusive. Still, her actions suggest she did not question slavery as George Washington did. Not surprising. The 18th century, the transatlantic slave trade began to flourish in the 16th century. It quickly became a major enterprise for Portuguese, British, Spanish, French, and Dutch traders. This is an opinion. This is fact. In 2014, Mount Vernon's archaeologists began a multi-year project to learn more about the slave cemetery at Mount Vernon. History. Most of that I only learned just from reading that piece earlier. And I didn't even read all that. Most of that was new, reading it with you for the first time. History. Teach American history. It is what it is. It happened. It was done. It's so interesting how most folks understand justice and they want to have the bad things that happen to them acknowledged and to be compensated, right? We're a very litigious society here. I'll sue you. I'm going to sue. I hear things all the time. Man, if someone did that to my daughter, I would kill him. It wouldn't matter what happened. If someone did that to me, I would do this, that, and the other. Wouldn't no one be able to stop me? So you'd want justice even if you took justice into your own hands. I don't even think folks are asking for justice. Definitely not all of us. Mainly, just tell the truth. Teach the actual history that happened. Critical race theory. Racism is normal. Have things gotten better? Sure. Do we still have huge issues in this country? Absolutely. Could it be made right? We could try. We should. We should. Again, as I said before, the Haitian people just had assassination of their president. There's a lot of civil unrest there. Folks are being sent back. We leave Afghanistan after 20 years. The big jumbo jets that you saw taking off, people hanging from and falling from. Some of those buses pulled into your town full of those folks. The stat I saw was 300 million a day on that war. But when it comes to reparations and trying to make Black people whole, and we don't know where we'd find that money or how much, or, I mean, what would they do with the money? Would they be responsible? Or would they spend it on Hennessy and weed and, buy some rims? Doesn't matter what we do with it. Could burn it like the Joker. That's what we wanted to do. Just saying. Anyhow, I wanted to, there's so much more to show, but I do have to get ready for tomorrow, as I will be covering the event at the Poulsbo Church tomorrow at Gateway. And again, that event is going to be tomorrow at 9 a.m. and at 10:30 online. And then there's a special panel, Q&A panel discussion at 6 p.m. And so I think it is important, as I said before, that you understand what's going on in your community. And, as I said before, I don't necessarily agree with the protest, but my reasoning behind that is, my preference is, you can say and feel how you want. I'd rather you say and feel how you want. I'd rather know. And I think that's a slippery slope. If you're going to protest folks for what they believe in, even if it's bad. It's their right to do so. My hope tomorrow is the arguments against critical race theory are steeped in evidence and fact, beyond opinion, or at least untruths. I will say, no, I won't say that. I will say I'm not necessarily going to be impartial, as you kind of know where I stand on it. I definitely kind of feel like I think absolutely American history should be taught, right? It happened, you teach it. That's it. There's no question on that. I do agree with that. However, how far you teach, how far you go, what you do, do we really want these folks teaching our kids when they're so hell-bent against it? I don't know if I pulled up some of the stories of what's happened in many of these classrooms. Horrifying stories. Yeah, let me share this one. Let me share this story. And that's why I question that, right? So you can force folks to say, hey, you know what? You will teach actual American history. You will teach about slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and all the bad things that America has done. And not just to Black people, just what they've done. Based on race, based on class. This article here was published in February 15 of this year. Lee schools investigating viral TikTok video of teacher denying slaves abuse and excusing the N-word. A viral video allegedly taken during an in-class discussion at Island Coast High School is under investigation by the Lee County School District. The video is one of 3 posted on TikTok by a student in the class, where an instructor of an advanced placement government course claims that slaves weren't whipped by white people and that the N-word, a racist slur, just means ignorant. The teacher's identity has not been confirmed by the news press. The teacher can be heard in the video describing the class as an advanced placement course, which offers college-level work and a chance for students to test in the content covered to earn college credit. The school, located in Cape Coral, generically lists 10 teachers in the social studies department, and the listing does not specify grade levels or content taught. Questions about the teacher, including a name and teaching status, were not answered by public school system. Rob Spichter, a spokesman for the district, wrote in an email that the district is aware of the video and it's under investigation. Spichter said he was not authorized to explain more when asked if the teacher had been removed from the classroom. A similar message was shared twice on the school's Twitter page on Sunday. The post made at 5:35 p.m. and again at 5:51 p.m. state the Island Coast High is aware of the situation and is currently under investigation. These schools, including the district offices, were closed Monday for President's Day. District investigators were on campus today to gather statements as students and staff returned from the President's Day holiday. Spichter said Tuesday, until the investigation process is complete, it will be inappropriate for us to comment any further. Attempts to reach a student identified on the TikTok handle, those social media, has been unsuccessful. There are tons of stories like this. Students, black students laying on the ground, white students reenacting being slave masters. Crazy racist assignments. But to say that slaves didn't get whipped, like, seriously? Seriously. In my research, I came across this. Interesting. This is from the New York Times Magazine. And this was August 19, 2019. We are committing educational malpractice, why slavery is mistaught and worse in American schools. In the preface, the geographical reader for the Dixie Children, Miranda Branson Moore, a teacher who founded a girls' school in North Carolina, noted that she wanted to teach children about the world without it going over their heads. The author of this little work, having found most of the juvenile books too complex for young minds, has for some time intended making an effort to simplify the science of geography. She wrote, "If she shall succeed in bringing this beautiful and useful study within the grasp of the little folks and making it both interesting and pleasant, her purpose will be fully accomplished." The book was published in 1863, the same year as the Emancipation Proclamation, and in the midst of the Civil War, teachers could review the lessons with suggested questions in the back of the book. Part of the lesson, 9 suggestions read, question, which race is the most civilized? Answer, the Caucasian. Question, is the African savage in this country? Answer, no, they are docile and religious here. Question, how are they in Africa, where they first came from? Answer, they are very ignorant, cruel, and wretched. More than a century and a half later, textbooks no longer publish such overt racist lies, but the United States still struggles to teach children about slavery, of which I shared the story back in February of the teacher saying, oh, hey, you know what? Slaves weren't whipped by white people. The N word, oh, that just means ignorant. Racism is normal. I hope this helps. All right, one more. I did so much research. One more. What kids are really learning about slavery? This is from The Atlantic. A new report finds the topic is mistaught and often sentimentalized, and students are alarmingly misinformed as a result. This is by Melinda D. Anderson. This was written back in February 1, 2018. So pre-George Floyd, pre-COVID. A class of middle schoolers in Charlotte, North Carolina, was asked to recite 4 reasons why Africans made good slaves. 9 third-grade teachers in suburban Atlanta assigned math and word problems about slavery and beatings. So when you see, I saw an article or a YouTube assignment that said, video that said, oh, so now math is racist? Yes. When you're coming up with math word problems about slavery and beatings, yeah. A high school in Los Angeles area reenacted a slave ship with students lying on the dark classroom floor, wrist taped, as staff play the role of slave ship captains. And for a lesson on colonial America, 5th graders school in northern New Jersey had to create posters advertising slave auctions. School assignments on slavery routinely draw national headlines and scorn. Yet beyond the outraged parents and school district apologies lies a complex and entrenched set of education challenges. A new report released by the Southern Poverty Law Center's Teaching Tolerance Project points to the widespread failure to accurately reach or teach the hard and nuanced history of American slavery and enslaved people. Collectively, the report finds that slavery is mistaught, mischaracterized, sanitized, and sentimentalized, leaving students poorly educated and contemporary issues of race and racism misunderstood. You know, you think about, the classic movies, Gone with the Wind. I'm not really into genre movies like that of that time, that period. But during that period, white people are depicted as, just living this grand life and, there are these stories, right? These are the favorites of many Americans. And it's like, oh, black people were living back then. But then we get roots and, those things. So I guess. In what is described as the first analysis of its kind, Teaching Tolerance conducted online surveys of 1,000 American high school seniors and more than 1,700 social study teachers across the country. The group also reviewed 10 commonly used U.S. history textbooks and examined 15 sets of state standards to assess what students know, what educators teach, what publishers include, and what standards require a vis-a-vis slavery. Among 12th graders, only 8% could identify slavery as the cause of the Civil War. Fewer than one-third, 32%, correctly named the 13th Amendment as the formal end of U.S. slavery, with a slightly higher share, 35%, choosing the Emancipation Proclamation. And fewer than half, 46%, identified the Middle Passage as the transport of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to North America. Maureen Costello, the director of Teaching Tolerance, said the research conducted in 2017 revealed the urgent need for schools to do a better job of teaching slavery. Students are being deprived of the truth about our history, and the materials that teachers have are not particularly good, she said. I would hope that the students will look at this, realize that they do deserve to know better. And teachers need to know there are better ways to teach this topic. The student results, which the report labels dismiss, extend beyond factual errors to the failure to grasp key concepts underpinning the nature and legacy of slavery. Fewer than one quarter, 22% of participating high school seniors knew that protections for slavery were embedded in America's founding documents. That rather than a particular institution of the South, slavery was a constitutionally enshrined right. And fewer than 4 in 10 students surveyed, 39%, understood how slavery shaped the fundamental beliefs of Americans about race and whiteness. Examining the teacher's survey results might help explain why students struggle to answer questions on American enslavement. Educators are struggling themselves. While teachers overwhelmingly, 92%, claim that they are comfortable discussing slavery, really, in their classroom, their teaching practices reveal profound lapses. Only slightly more than half, 52%, teach their students about slavery's legal roots in the nation's founding documents, while just 53% emphasize the extent of slavery outside the antebellum South, and 54% teach the continuing legacy of slavery in today's society. Additionally, dozens of teachers rely on simulations, role playing, and games to teach slavery, a method that Teaching Tolerance has warned against on the grounds that it can lead to stereotypes and oversimplifications. Meanwhile, the large majority, 73%, use slaves when talking about slavery in classroom instead of enslaved persons. 49%, the latter term of which has gained favor in emphasizing the humanity of those forced into bondage. The overwhelming majority of teachers who participated in the survey, 90%, are somehow affiliated with Teaching Tolerance and its learning materials. Costello said this indicates the problem revealed in the survey result could be much more pervasive than the findings suggest. If anything, I think this collection of survey respondents is a group that's more sensitive to the issue of race, more likely to confront them in the classroom compared to the broader teacher workforce, she explained, adding that the findings are a silhouette of the problem. Similarly, many of those surveyed were elementary school teachers, which Costello said were noteworthy considering their ability of slavery education in the early grades from the narrative, the fake history that students carry through high school. Nina Pinta Santa Maria, Christopher Columbus, and the Indians had Thanksgiving. Ursula Wolf Roca, a high school U.S. history teacher at Lake Oswego, Oregon, a Portland suburb, has encountered students' common misconceptions, such as the belief that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves and that the Civil War was really about states' rights. Her straightforward solution is assigning original documents, right? History. Read Lincoln's first inaugural address, and you do not find a fiery abolitionist, but someone promising to enforce the Fugitive Slave Clause. Read the Articles of Succession, and you find striking declarations from slave states that their actions are rooted in a desire to protect slavery. Still, Wolf Roca echoed the report's teacher respondents in stressing the inherent challenges in tackling the subject well. As a white teacher, she admittedly struggles with presenting an unsanitized version of slavery that doesn't desensitize her students. Lake Oswego High School to the violence and Black pain. Kids walk into my class knowing about slavery, but their recitation of the knowledge is dull, lifeless, and bored, she said. It has the feel of something memorized and rote rather than internalized and meaningful. She uses personal narratives of enslaved people to teach the ugliness and the injustice of the past while being careful to keep the rape and whipping to a minimum. Right? It's what happened. Wolf Roca aims to strike a delicate balance, but she wonders whether she's whitewashing history. Yes. How do we surface the realities of slavery without resorting to spectacle? Like teachers cited in the report, she finds that exploring the true cost of slavery is difficult but essential. And how could you find the true cost if you won't even talk about it? If we're going to deny it, if we're going to whitewash it, if we're going to sanitize it, if we're going to romanticize it. They fell in love on a plantation. Good God, man. Further compounding teachers' difficulties is the quality of textbooks and state content standards. Teaching Tolerance found that textbooks generally lacked comprehensive coverage of slavery. In Enslaved People, the best textbook earned a score of 70 on the project's rubric of essential elements for bringing slavery into the classroom. The state standards were generally timid, focused more on abolitionists than on the everyday experiences of slavery. Taken together, the study exposes a number of unsettling facts about slavery education. U.S. classrooms, slavery is taught without context, prioritizing feel-good stories over harsh realities. Slavery is taught as an exclusively Southern institution, making it the complexity of the Northern institutions and citizens of America's slave-based economy. Slavery is rarely connected to white supremacy, the ideology that justified its perpetuation. And slavery is seldom connected to the present, drawing the arc from enslavement to Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, and the persistence of structural racism. I know this is long, but it's about over. LeGarrette King, an assistant professor of social studies education at the University of Missouri, served on the Teaching Tolerance Advisory Board that developed a framework for the teaching American slavery. Basically, the concepts that every graduating high school senior should know as part of the report's recommendations. As a teacher educator, he said the study fills a significant void. Students training to be teachers, especially those being educated to teach elementary schools, know little about the history of slavery, he stated, noting that much of the curriculum and reading and teaching around racially and ethnically diverse people features fun, food, and festival approach to learning. By contrast, King said, the framework provides a guide to delve into topics such as slavery and Black history with a thorough and academically sound approach versus teaching slavery in reductive and superficial ways. Can you teach slavery without being philosophically violent to the children? The answer is no. Violence will occur and is expected, he said. The key is the recognition of white supremacy and of the humanity of Black people that helps aid in the complexity of the subject. What I'll say here is, our kids, the music they listen to, the lyrics they listen to, the video games they play, the movies they watch, what they experience in their homes with their families. Think they can handle this. Relatedly, the study also drew attention to teachers who struggle to have open and honest conversations in mixed-race classrooms about the atrocities of slavery. Antoinette Dempsey Waters, a Black social studies educator at Wakefield High School in Arlington, Virginia, said she relies on autobiographies to give vivid picture of enslavement to help all students in her highly diverse school walk away with the knowledge of the evil of slavery as they come to understand and respect the fight for freedom waged by enslaved people. Notably, Teaching Tolerance recommends using primary sources and original historical documents to improve instruction and making textbooks better to reflect more accurate and inclusive view of slavery. So, just as Governor DeSantis was saying, right? We should stick to the facts. Yes, stick to the facts. Teach the history. That is U.S. history. Don't omit the history. It is clear that the United States is still struggling with how to talk about the history of slavery and its aftermath. The report concludes, the front lines of the struggle are in schools, as teachers do the hard work of explaining this country's history and helping students to understand how the present relates to the past. This was from theatlantic.com. Good article. And as I said before, I believe that, the argument here really is centered around teaching kids true American history. Talking about Marxism and all the straw man arguments and detractors. It's intellectually dishonest. Well, hell, it's not even intellectual. It's just flat out lie. Critical race theory, as I said in the beginning, that video is more collegiate in nature. It is a theory, a framework in which to look at the institutions of society through the lens of racism. And I've shared with you a few of those institutions, like the criminal justice system, education. I've told you some anecdotal stories. We even shared some statistics with you. So, as I stated before, critical race theory isn't some kind of curriculum that is taught in a school. You're not going to teach theory to fourth graders. Layla will be in the 5th grade this year. She's not going to delve into theory. But she does need to know history. She does need to know what happened in the time periods that history is covered as we go through the grades, as children go from elementary to middle to high school into college. If you were talking about a particular era, you talk about what happened. You don't whitewash it. And I think it's very disingenuous when we have many parents and teachers, for that matter, who allow their kids to watch these movies, play these games, listen to these songs. But this is harmful. Something that, in regards to slavery, doesn't exist anymore. Not in that form, right? But the things that they're exposed to today, these things are real. So I think they're mature enough. I think they're resilient enough. They're exposed to worse. And ultimately, the argument is teach history. Don't whitewash it. It's not being replaced. You're not replacing science and math and technology with critical race theory. But teaching kids about the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and Christopher Columbus discovered America. It's not American history. It's not relevant history. Not saying that you don't talk about that period. But basically, what I've shared with you is probably the most memorable memory of learning history at an elementary school age. Oh, and that the natives and the Indians, they just, they traded. And they had a Thanksgiving dinner together. And everything was all great and good. We even celebrated it and colored turkeys and we will never move past until it is adequately addressed. And when I say we, I don't mean the Black community. I mean Americans. I mean this country. As I said before, we teach our kids, if you do something to someone, you apologize, whether it was an accident or on purpose. And if you can make it better, you try. Hey, I'm sorry, I knocked over your tray. Whether I meant it or not. You know, I actually did mean it. I was angry in the moment and I tripped you. I am apologizing to you now. Let me help you clean this up. I'm not going to be happy about it. I'm going to appreciate the apology. I'm going to appreciate that you help me clean it up and that you tried to make it right. Am I going to forget that you tripped my ass? Nope. Am I going to forgive you? Probably, because that's what we do. We want to move forward too. We want to experience the American dream just like everybody else. We want to raise our kids in a healthy, safe environment. We want to give them the opportunities that we didn't have, opportunities we wouldn't even think of. We want them to excel, become whatever it is that they can think of. Find someone that loves them and cares about them, start families of their own. We want to retire, travel, eat food, enjoy our families, enjoy our friends, enjoy our recreational time. Something to consider. But I'm glad that you joined me tonight. I told myself yesterday, I'm not going to go as long as I did yesterday. It was like 1 hour and 43 minutes. I went 2 hours and 17 today. It is what it is. Like I said, there was a lot to unpack. I do hope that someone finds it helpful. Even if it's only one, it only takes one, because the change starts with one, and that changes you. And through your actions, first your thoughts, your ideas manifest into action. You draw people unto you and put positive things into the world and make the change that you want to see. You're not going to change it overnight. You're not going to change everyone. That's not the point. I do know that as I've gotten into this work, that my life has improved by trying to improve the lives of others. That there is a peace in that. There's a contentment. There is a power and a strength that comes from that, a hopefulness, not a helplessness. So thankful to wake up every morning and find new ways to give, to try to change the community, to try to change myself, to try to grow, to try to become a better version of myself in the most cliche way possible. Very true story. And every day, I don't give 100%. I'm say, man, I'm gonna give 100% every day. Not possible. I think I was at 72 today. But you know what? I wasn't at 50. And I actually had the ability today to actually give a percentage, to give an effort. And tomorrow I'll try to give a better effort. It's so crazy. It's I got a pounding headache. I've had it for like 4 hours. But this needed to be done. This is the work. What is your work? Find your work. It is very rewarding. It can definitely help you when things are going well and when things aren't going well. Know that you do make a difference, that you are needed. There are people that care and love you and need you. Find your space. And if you need one, we always have space for you. I will definitely see you tomorrow. I appreciate you joining me. Hope you get some sleep. I know it's late. I know if my Australian person is watching, my East Coast folks, wherever you may be, those that are up with me, it's 1:13. What time is the church service tomorrow? 9? Yeah, I'll sleep 4 hours. It's all good. All right, till tomorrow, y'all, or later on today. I'm Marwan Cameron. This is The Conduit.